On the 29th of April 1945, American soldiers stormed into Dachau concentration camp, and within minutes of arriving, corpses of prisoners were found. This haunted the minds of the liberators, and then the SS guards who remained at the camp were rounded up and were gathered together. But the inmates themselves took vengeance into their own hands, and they banded together to batter and slaughter their former guards. There was one incident in which American soldiers turned a blind eye to the fact that 2 prisoners beat a German guard to death with a shovel, and when one beating was finished it was claimed that there was not much left. There was a lot of hate in the hearts of the prisoners of Dachau, and this was the oldest concentration camp that was opened, and it was a place of terrifying torture and execution. There was even an incident in which the American soldiers turned a machine gun on the guards, who were arrested. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the vengeance executions of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Many of the prisoners of Dachau who survived until liberation had been locked up for some time. These were the ultimate survivors, as just days before the camp was liberated, the SS guards forced 7,000 prisoners on a death march away from the camp that led to the deaths of many who died at the hands of gunshots and the conditions of the march. It was the scouts of the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion who found a satellite camp close to Dachau, and then soldiers of the 3rd Battalion 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, approached the large Dachau complex. Dachau was a site in which over 188,000 prisoners were incarcerated for many different reasons, and over 41,000 died inside the barbed wire fences. The inmates were terrorised on a daily basis, and they faced the threat of and also explicit torture in the forms of public floggings, pole and tree hangings, and also the standing cells, tiny rooms like dungeons they were locked in for days on end. But there were also public executions carried out inside the roll call yards, aimed to keep the inmates in a constant state of terror. When the American liberators approached, they found 39 railway boxcars, with the remains of roughly 2,000 people inside, and there was human material almost everywhere. The smell of the corpses remained with the Americans for the rest of their lives, and some cried their eyes out and threw up at the horror. There were calls for the SS to surrender, but the SS guards fired upon the Americans. It was then claimed that, at noon on Sunday, the camp was quiet, and the SS guards were at their posts in the towers when the cry "Americans" went up. A prisoner rushed towards a gate, and a guard shot him. Outside, a single American soldier stood looking casually at the towers, while the guards eyed him, and others who were 200 or 300 yards away. When the Americans opened fire, the guards in the gate tower came down, hands in the air. One held a pistol behind his back, and the first American shot him. As they advanced further towards Dachau and the prisoner part of the camp, more bodies were discovered, and many had been dead for days, and they were left where they fell. They also found a gas chamber, crematoria, and further rooms stuffed filled with bodies. But the camp had already been in the stages of evacuation when it was discovered, but an inexperienced Hauptsturmführer named Heinrich Vicker was left to surrender the camp. One man who accepted the surrender claimed, "As we approached the southwest corner, 3 people came forward with a flag of truce. We met them about 75 yards north of the southwest corner." These 3 people were a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Maurer, and 2 SS troops, who said they were the camp commander and his assistant. They had came here on the night of the 28th to take over from the regular camp personnel for the purpose of surrendering the camp to the advancing Americans. The Swiss Red Cross representative said there were around 100 SS guards in the camp who had their arms stacked except for the people in the tower. He had given instruction that there would be no shots fired, and it would take about 50 men to relieve the guards, as there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected. But as the site was liberated, there were many prisoners who turned upon the guards, and of course one must empathise with the inmates as their ordeal was completely horrific. There were a number of prisoners who caught the SS men, and it was said during one incident that the first SS man elbowed 1 or 2 prisoners out of his way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed. The Carpos, those prisoners who were given some command and power to wield over other inmates, were also attacked and were battered by weapons, and with whatever might the prisoners had. One American priest claimed that he heard that 3 young men had beaten one of the most brutal Dachau guards to death, and that they found this man hiding in a barn, dressed as a peasant, but they dealt with him. There were a number of SS guards who were killed close to Watchtower B, and these were killed by American troops, and they would not go down without a fight. However, one of the most notorious killings that took place of the SS guards inside of Dachau was what happened in the area, which was used to store coal. There were roughly 50 German prisoners who had been seized, and they were gathered together in an area which was enclosed by an L-shaped wall, which was roughly 8 feet high. This was next to the hospital, and guarding the prisoners was a machine gun team staffed by men from I Company. Sparks left the machine gun team to stand over the men, but as he walked off, he heard a cry of, "They're trying to get away." With this, the machine gun team then opened fire, and one 19-year-old soldier who was nicknamed Bird Eye was kicked from the gun. However, he had turned this on the captives and had shot around 12 of them, and many others were wounded. The gunner was left crying a lot, and claimed the prisoners tried to get away. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks later claimed, "It was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being the most accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. There were further killings at the hands of the American Army. For example, there was the commander of I Company, Lieutenant William P. Walsh, who shot 4 Germans in a railway boxcar who had surrendered, and then Private Albert Pruitt finished them off with a coup de grace gunshot. Walsh had also, when he entered Dachau, split the captured guards and the prisoners up, and had also divided the prisoners of war into Wehrmacht soldiers and SS men. The SS men were then marched into a separate part of the camp, where they were then executed by gunshot. There were some medics who were later accused of not giving out medical aid to the wounded SS men, but there was very little action ever taken against the American soldiers who were involved in the executions. Inside of Dachau there was a lot of anger and horror, and the prisoners wanted to inflict their own revenge and vengeance upon those men who had caused them a lot of pain and suffering. After liberation, the authorities tried their best to make the conditions of the camp better, and they did whatever they could to save the lives of the prisoners. Dachau later became a camp which was used by the American Army to hold war criminals, SS officers and others, but there would be a war crimes trial held there, and some of these dealt with the guards who worked inside of Dachau. But the killings and executions that took place at the site led to little action with regards to anyone being found guilty of the crime of mistreating or killing prisoners of war. The killings of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, technically in the eyes of international law, were a war crime, but it was a chapter of the final days of the Second World War that was mostly covered up. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.